Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris. We are in the final episode of going through Man's Search for Meaning. I decided to just make this the last episode. I know we didn't have discussion questions last time, and we're not going to have them this time either. If you have seen from reading these last two sections of the book, what is noted as the Postscript, the chapter, the Postscript. And it's divided up into two, the case for a tragic optimism and an afterword. What you'll find is really this is kind of like the summary a little bit of what happened in the book. Case for a tragic optimism, that's still written by Victor. Then the afterword is written by Dr. Winslade. And especially Dr. Winslade, he kind of summarizes the book for us a little bit, and he makes a little bit of points. And in this case for a tragic optimism, this is kind of like maybe bringing all the ideas together that Victor has shared with us over the course of this book. So I just decided to combine it. Still kind of a shorter section. It was about 30 pages, but you'll see that a lot of ideas kind of are reflected or repeated. They're repeated and are consistent throughout this book, but especially in this section. These are ideas that have come up before in earlier sections of this book. Let me go in my copy here. Where this starts on my copy of page 137. And of course, the title of this section, The Case for Tragic Optimism. And so what does Victor mean when he says the case for tragic optimism? So it kind of sounds like an oxymoron there. Tragic, tragedy, optimism, you're optimistic, you're hopeful, but tragedy is obviously like danger, like a very unpleasant event. So what does he mean by this? And he says this, in brief, it means that one is and remains optimistic in spite of the tragic triad. So in spite of the tragedy, you remain optimistic. So what is the tragic triad? That is these three forces that you will have to deal with in your life. I think it's safe to say you'll have to deal with all three of these: pain, guilt, and death. And Victor's tragic optimism here is asking the question if life can retain its meaning in spite of all three of these things. And it's an optimism in the face of tragedy, like we were just saying. Can life retain its meaning in spite of these? And I think Victor answers it here, and I think from what we have seen, it can, if you choose it to, right? And it's going to be different for every person how they go about implementing that, but if you choose, then yes, life can retain its meaning in spite of those three things. So how does one go about doing this? Victor talks about this at the bottom of page 137. I speak of a tragic optimism, that is, an optimism in the face of tragedy, and in view of the human potential, which at its best allows for three things. And actually, we're going to talk about later in this section about how to go about assigning meaning to your life. And Victor lays out three things. But in here, human potential would at its best allows for: one, turning suffering into a human achievement. I think I have this on the next slide. Yes. Two, deriving from guilt the opportunity to change oneself for the better. And three, deriving from life's transitoriness an incentive to take responsible action. And again, what does transitoriness mean? This means the life's transitions, the transition from life to death, from one part of your life, young adulthood, let's say, to being a man, being an adult. So these are the conclusions. These are the results of human potential, maybe, are these three things. And again, this idea of cause and effect, or results and externalities, let's call them. I think, and I believe externalities is an economic term that means the results of actions that you don't account for. In a way, happiness should be, according to that definition that I just stated, and I don't exactly know if that's 100% the correct definition, but according to that definition, happiness should be an externality. It should be something that ensues from pursuing something else, right? But not in and of itself being pursued. You know, we talked about this previously, how, you know, it's almost seen like a disease not to be happy. Like, oh, why aren't you happy? You should be happy. You know, and if you feel down and stuff, you, instead of searching for the deeper meaning behind it, you just reach for the quick fix, whether that's, you know, spending money on entertainment, spending money on drugs, alcohol, other things of that nature, psychiatric drugs, you know, to dull the pain, to numb it away, or to give yourself a little bit of a high. But you need to own your suffering, own that unhappiness, be responsible for it, and get down to the root of what's really causing that. Because when the drugs and the alcohol, all that other external stuff goes away, well, then that unhappiness is going to come back. And that's where you get into a feedback loop of, you know, there was a great book. Joe Rogan had this author on the podcast. I forget his name. It's called Chasing the Scream. So you keep on chasing this happiness only for you to catch it and then have it escape from you again. And I think what Victor says here is don't get caught up in that. Let's continue on. Oh, yeah, page 139. He talks about give up-itis. Give up-itis. This was seen, if you guys remember, do you remember in his experiences in a concentration camp, Victor talks about how the people, like nobody really smoked, as far as the prisoners. The only people who did smoke were like the high status prisoners, the capos, or people who were on their way out. So you did have access to cigarettes. And I think Victor talks about he had access to cigarettes, but he traded them in for food. The people that would hang on to the cigarettes and smoke were the people that kind of mailed it in and gave up. And they wanted that last stimulant of nicotine to kind of make them feel good and have them escape from the tragedy that they were in. So anybody they saw smoking, they know that, oh my gosh, they are giving up, for lack of a better word. And Victor talks about the people who refused to get out of bed one day. No amount of warnings or threats could get them out of bed. They were done. They did not want to live anymore. But through successfully finding the meaning in your life, it gives you a way to cope with the suffering, to give up-itis at bay. As long as you have something to live for. Like I said down here, people have enough to live by, but nothing to live for. Remember that Nietzsche quote, "Man who has a why can endure any how." And you got to be careful. Victor talks about, as far as give up-itis, to make sure that it's your pursuit and pushing through suffering is not in vain, and that it can result in a fatal condition, kind of like what happened with the gentleman who he talked about had like a dream that the war would end by a certain date. And as that date approached, it was less and less likely, and he ended up getting sick and dying. And Victor attributes it in part to the fact that he was so hopeful when the day was getting less and less likely to happen. It kind of like broke his spirit in a way. So the thing that I was saying here, that in my life, is you need the little wins. Even if you're striving for this goal in your life, this meaning, and it's hard and you're still not there, you may not have won the war, but there's still battles that are being fought on the way to there. Right? So you need to make the little battles for yourself. Like, okay, I have a goal to get an A on my math test next week. Oh, okay. I'm going to set up for myself 4 different practice tests, and I want to allocate an hour to complete each test, and then each test I want to get 5% better on each test. So the first test we'll use as a barometer. I get 65% of that. Okay, second test, let's get 75%. Third test, let's get 80%. The last practice test I take 85%. And it sets you up these little wins that are a little more manageable, right? It's just, and I remember somebody told me this about golf, and how golf is really, you're managing the course and you're managing your emotions. So you got 200 yards that you gotta hit to the hole, and you can't get there in 200, even with your big stick, like a 3-wood, 5-wood, what have you. Well, let's break it down. If I know I can hit my 7-iron pretty good. I can get a 150, and then I can pitch on to the green at 50 yards with my sand wedge, right? So you break it down. This is the same thing in coding in what I do with my career. You break it down into smaller tasks. Like whenever you have a coding challenge, you first have to read the problem, understand what it's asking for, then let's start breaking it up into different pieces. And I think this helps a lot in life, because you need, if you can get a little obstacle, it just gets the momentum. There's a book, The Compound Effect, kind of talks about this. And you get the momentum going to overcome that large wall at the end. I think it's very important. So set little milestones on your way to the big one that is the one that you're really worried about. On page 140, Victor brings up this unemployment state of like a patient or people who are unemployed. So page 140, halfway down. Remember how he gave that, there was that survey of the unemployed miners and how they were in like a time warp, and he compared it to what the prisoners felt in the concentration camp. And he was saying that, these miners felt like they could not move their life forward until their employment was figured out first. So it's like everything stopped when they stopped working. because they didn't have any income coming in. Well, Victor kind of expands on this a little bit here, and how saying that unemployment neurosis. Where else have we heard this neurosis? This was with noogenic neuroses. Noogenic, of course, meant the mind. It's like a Greek or Latin word for mind, nous, Noos. So if you're unemployed, being jobless is equated with being useless. And then useless is equated with being meaningless. So you don't have a job, you're not working, you're seen as not contributing to society, and because you're not contributing to society, your life has no meaning attached to it. However, Victor explains this, that the patients who were jobless, unemployed, when they got them to volunteer for a cause, they said youth organizations, adult education, public libraries, etc. Then this feeling of despair, their depression went away, even though they weren't getting paid. But Victor says, it's one of the last words of the book, the way to find meaning in your life is to help somebody else find meaning in theirs. Right? So you're contributing to a cause that's bigger than you, that's not just you, even though you're not getting paid. And it's interesting, though, sometimes, how many times do you see the opposite? People are paid lots of money, but then they're often depressed. Right? And they're working because they're not contributing to something that's bigger than themselves, is what I would say. And Victor has this line, man does not live by welfare alone. So this I think kind of ties into the whole UBI, universal basic income. And that conversation has been held a lot in today's world. We had a government stimulus check, and I'm in the United States, if you guys didn't know. That fades, right? That fades away. And yeah, you can take care of a person's, basic income, basic needs, but what then? They have to still have some sort of thing that they're living for outside of that. They have to be working on something creative, building something, taking care of other people. It's not as simple as it sounds. Let's continue on. In this here, Victor continues on, depression may not be a sign of neurosis, but a sign of being human. It's kind of alluding to what we were saying earlier. You shouldn't mask the fact that you're unhappy. And I kind of maybe do this a little bit myself, being honest. I try to fake like nothing is fazing me, right? But in reality, it is. And I don't think it's anything, like Victor says here, it's just a sign of being human. Right? It's nothing that needs to be, you don't need to be taken apart and completely reset. It's just something that you have to work through, recognize, and it takes time. There's no easy button here. Victor goes back and talks about now this existential vacuum. And remember, this was talked about in Logotherapy in a Nutshell, that section of the book, and how, what was the existential vacuum? This was the kind of empty space that is left within somebody when they don't have a meaning in their life that they are striving towards. And this existential vacuum may cause depression, aggression, addiction. And I made some little notes here about each and how depression can affect you, that you don't really see a meaning in your life, but you have to be responsible for your life in getting you to the day that meaning might manifest itself in your life by your work, right? Not that it magically appears, but it comes about from the work that you put in. Victor was talking about here, I think it was page 142, how you don't know when the meaning will show up, so you have to keep just working for the next day in case it does finally show up. So aggression, I know I've been definitely aggressive in points in my life where things aren't going well and I get angry at other people even though they had nothing to do with it. They were talking about how Boy Scouts, aggression amongst Boy Scouts ended up disappearing when they had collectively dedicated themselves to like a team goal, a team task, right? They accepted the challenge. They were themselves challenged to complete it, and in that, they were united. And their aggression, I don't know if it disappeared, but it was channeled in a different way. You know, the aggression was channeled in a very focused manner to get the task done. In the last one here, bullet point, the addiction, how existential vacuum can manifest an addiction. And saying they were doing a survey. Victor talks about how 90% of alcoholics suffered from an abysmal feeling of meaninglessness. So this is how the existential vacuum, if it goes unchecked, can result in these three things. Victor makes this very, very interesting point on page 143, and it spills over to 144, about how life, it's like a film. So to understand a film, think about a movie like The Sixth Sense. Well, you don't truly understand that movie until the very end, right? When you have all of the components of the film, all of the scenes at your disposal. You only understand it at its very end. And Victor says, is life not similar? You know, you go about searching for the meaning of life, and, you know, one thing is that that's not a question that you should ask, right? We've talked about flipping that question. You don't ask life what the meaning of life is. Actually, it's life that asks you to be present and to life asks you what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Life is asking you what your meaning is. It's the other way around. I'm not explaining that completely correct, but I remember when we kind of Victor flipped that question around, and it's not you asking life. Life isn't going to give you any answers. It's more so life is asking you to work towards those answers. But life is in a similar way. We're not going to find the answer to that until way down the road, or when the road is closing, when the road is ending. A lot of people searching for that answer, you know, getting frustrated, but you got to wait till you have all the components at your disposal, especially if you are younger. And there was a section, I think we'll get into it in a second here, about how we should be envying the elderly instead of seeing them as, not giving them the respect, or like not seeing them as useful. And Victor distinguishes between usefulness and value. Like, okay, elderly, maybe they're retired, older, maybe a little bit of cognitive decline, physical decline, but they're not valueless. In fact, they are more valuable because of the potentialities that they have stored in their life. Again, it's in the past, but it's not destroyed or deleted, it's stored. And then through life's transitoriness, they've gotten older, but now the things in their life, they have actually come to fruition. Whereas somebody younger, sure, they might be more useful, but they don't have the life experiences behind it like an elderly person does. And I think this, especially today, I think it gets lost a lot. I don't think we value our elders nearly as much. I mean, there's such like a focus, I guess you would call it, on like youth, being youthful, looking young, thinking like a younger person, if you know what I mean about that. I mean, yeah, I think it's just a little sad. What can be done about a situation? Page 144. Victor talks about this. He talks about the difference between perception. Perception of meaning differs from the classical concept of Gestalt perception. And Victor says it boils down to, really, perception comes down to becoming aware of a possibility against the background of reality. Becoming aware of what can be done about a given situation. So that's what perception is. And you have to recognize that a lot of situations you're not stuck, but you need a different perception about it. Different way of looking at it, thinking outside the box, so to speak. So this is, I think I mentioned this earlier, the three ways to arrive at meaning in your life. So the three ways that Victor highlights here: one, creating a work, or by doing a deed. So this could be like your job gives you meaning. Whether you're like a teacher, doctor, but even other jobs that are not working directly with people give the people that work at that job a lot of meaning. Another is love, or as Victor puts it, experiencing something or encountering someone. And he has a quote here about experiencing can be as valuable as achieving is therapeutic, because it compensates for our one-sided emphasis on the external world of achievement at the expense of the internal world of experience. So experience involves you in the outer world. Achievement is something internal, which is still valuable, but now you're having this experience with nature, with a loved one. So you bring somebody along with you to share in it. And the last one is growing beyond yourself or changing yourself. Like what Victor experienced in the camp. Like they talk about Vietnam veterans changing their experience as a prisoner of war and saying that it really helped to mold them into who they are today. Let me see if I can find the actual, Prisoners of War of the Vietnam War. This is page 146. That although their captivity was extraordinarily stressful, filled with torture, disease, malnutrition, and solitary confinement, they nevertheless benefited from the captivity experience, seeing it as a growth experience. And they talk about this quote down here, this last bullet point, was a guy by the name of Jerry Long who ended up being a quadriplegic. They talk about it on page 147 about he broke his neck, but the way he chose to look at it, he might have been paralyzed, but it did not paralyze his mind. It's like, I broke my neck, but it didn't break me. And even with this a tragic accident, he ended up going to school, taking classes at a community college. He enrolled in psychology courses. So he didn't give up on it. Thought that was a cool story. So those sections all dealt with like pain, right? Those were the things what the existential vacuum can cause, right? What that can lead to. Where was that slide? Here, human potential. No. Where was it? Depression, aggression, addiction. Oh, the tragic triad, I meant. Pain. So all that we were just talking about kind of dealt with the pain. Now Victor gets into the guilt and then next death. So this term is brought up, page 148. Mysterium iniquatus. This is when he's talking about guilt. So what does that mean? Mysterium iniquatus, and I believe it means mystery of evil, right? So he talks about this as far as criminals and how criminals need to have a chance to become guilty and take ownership of their actions and rise above it. But a lot of times they aren't allowed to do this by society, by other people, the justice system. And Victor actually says that on page 149, even criminals themselves abhor this treatment and prefer to be held responsible for their deeds. I don't know how much of that is true, because I would think if you're a criminal, you want to get out of your punishment, right? But I don't know, maybe things were different back in Victor, at the time of this writing. Maybe. Victor talks about this concept of collective guilt and how he doesn't believe in it. He doesn't believe that one person is responsible for the behavior of another person. And he talks about how somebody came up to him and asked him, how can you still write your books in German, even though Hitler, was German? That was his language. And Victor retorts back, how can you still use knives after so many killers have used them to stab and murder their victims? And she stopped objecting after that. The next one, death. Remember that quote, Victor's credo? Live as if you were living for the second time and had acted as wrongly the first time as you are about to act now. Right? And that kind of shows life's transitoriness, how it's not, you're going to have transitions in life, and you have to recognize that you're not going to be here on this earth for a long, long time. There's going to come a day, and you need to take ownership that as that day comes, you make some choices that give your life meaning, helping others, helping your family, setting yourself up for the transitions that you are taking in your life. And then here's where he talks about being envious of the elderly. We had kind of touched on this, how they have the potentialities of the past, and they've manifested them, and the difference between usefulness and value. The elderly should be respected. They have a lot of value in the things they have learned. You can learn a lot talking to these people. Learned meaninglessness. This was something, and again, how it's interesting that Victor kind of digs at the modern or the mainstream psychological views at the time. Some of it having to deal with Freud's psychoanalysis. But he wants you to be careful with, I guess, who you surround yourself with. Because there's going to be therapists who try to push on you that it's not your fault, or there's other people to blame. Life is meaningless. This is actually where this stems from, where he's saying right here, like on page 152, life is meaningless and you shouldn't really do much about it. You shouldn't take yourself seriously. There's no grand purpose. It just is. And Victor was saying you shouldn't be inoculating yourself with cynicism instead of immunization against nihilism. Don't be cynical that life has no meaning, and don't be nihilistic about it. Right? That you have to find that meaning. Yet that gives you the responsibility to make changes in your life. But if you just go around saying, nothing matters, how are you going to be able to make changes in your life, whether that's losing weight, getting better for an athletic event, graduating college, getting a job? How is that going to help you? Oh, I'm sorry, that was here. Yeah. And he talked about wanting to de-guru logotherapy. So I think what he meant by this was making it less like preachy, less religious. How many gurus do you see today, especially on social media? A lot of people saying, hey, I can help you make money, or hey, buy my course. I'll get you on the right track for your life. We'll get you financially free. You'll get you better at relationships. There's a lot of that. And probably they give a lot of good advice, right? But that's not what logotherapy is about. It's not about listening to somebody preach. It's about listening to yourself. And he uses this analogy of a supermarket versus the Oriental Bazaar, which is Oriental Bazaar. This is like a Eastern market, like a Middle Eastern market. And he was saying, I think if I can find this. It's in page 153. So at the Oriental Bazaar, you're at this market. People are pining for your business. They're telling you what you should buy. But at the supermarket, you're shown all of these array of foods and drinks and whatnot, and you ultimately make the choice on what you walk to the checkout counter with. So he makes that distinction between, the supermarket is more in line with what logotherapy should be. You should be leading it, not the therapist themselves. You're not laying on the couch explaining your problems. You're laying on the couch and talking about your future and what goals you're going to set forth. And another, kind of little dig at Freud, or just being critical of Sigmund Freud, who was saying that individuals can be dialed into like one emotion if you heard them that way. So he was talking about how if you expose individuals to hunger, all their differences will blur, and they will just have that uniform expression of hunger, that deep down animalistic instinctual nature of hunger. And Victor says, well, you should have seen me in the concentration camp. Because yes, there were people that definitely had this behavior of by any means necessary. Throw your, co-prisoners, the people that you were in prison with, under the bus. And then there was other ones who helped their fellow men out in the prison. Victor says they became more different. It's not that they became the same. They became more different because people made different choices. People chose to look at it in different ways. I think I mentioned this before on here on one of the earlier episodes about an alcoholic father had two sons. Right? One of his sons sees his father, grows up to get a PhD, raise a family, start a business. The other son sees his father and becomes an alcoholic himself. Everything will become worse unless each of us does his best. That's kind of what Victor ends that with. And then we move on to the afterword, which again was mainly just a summary. I mean, I had these quick notes here for you guys, but these are things that we've talked about. These being responsible. You have that freedom to choose how to respond to suffering. It's self-determination. This isn't a step-by-step guide. God bless the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, but this is not a 12 rules. This is why you should respond to suffering this way. Why you should find meaning in your life. These are things that we've talked about, except for these last two things about how we touched a little bit on how Victor didn't believe in collective guilt, reconciliation rather than revenge. As Jesus speaks, if somebody strikes you on the cheek, then you offer him the other one. Psychiatry is the healing of the soul. Religion is the salvation of the soul. So what I think this means is psychiatry helps to find the meaning in your life. Religion is to find your relationship with God. And we can't misconstrue these two things. Psychiatry should not delve into what religion delves in. So those are all points that, we've talked about before, which brings us to the end of the book. Guys, this was a really good read. There are a lot of books like this. The ideas in this book were not really new to me, but they were presented in a different fashion. Because this was this man's experience at the height of one of the most tragic events in human history, right? And I've heard, similar stories about people being broke, homeless, and then rising back from it, right? I've heard those stories. This one kind of hits a little different. And this one is very, it keeps things simple. The ideas are, I like that this book kept the ideas kind of simple, because I think simple can get through to most people. But if we complicate things, I think that's when people lose the message a little bit. It's almost like, from what you've read here, from the prefaces and the introduction, Victor he didn't want to publish the book with his name on it. He wanted to publish it with his prison camp number. Right? It's almost like he didn't really care for the recognition of this book. He just wanted people to have access to the ideas. there's something about timeless books like this, because this came out, I mean, originally right after World War II, right? I mean, the front cover says copyright, the earliest date is 1959, as it was, but Victor's written a lot of other books that deal with logotherapy and meaning. This was it was a very tremendous book, and it's definitely things that, like, I wish I would have read this book earlier in my life, but again, I don't know if I would have completely have understood the ideas as I understand them now. Now I kind of understand because I went through some tough times where I don't think I really had a meaning. And I think I kind of getting better. I think I definitely have some semblance of like goals and like future plans. This was a very good book. If I were to sum it up in one sentence, I mean, I would say the Friedrich Nietzsche quote: "If a man has a why, he can bear any how." And that's what I think a lot of people are missing in their lives. And it's not going to be easy, but be responsible for your life and be worthy of your sufferings. Guys, thank you very much if you listened all the way to the end. That concludes Man's Search for Meaning. Let me know what you thought. I do have an idea for the next book that I will do, and I will post it here for you guys. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. My name's Chris. It's been a great ride for this book, and I'm looking forward to the next book and the next journey to take with our fellow listeners. Thank you, guys.